Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. A bit of a troublesome this week was, but remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint, so there will be weeks with more good news, there will be weeks with some bad news. Let's look at what's happening in Ukraine and around Ukraine and talk about what can be done about this. First things first, I'm gonna tackle the thumbnail question. And Russia is indeed really burning down. So remember, there was this big facility that Ukrainians hit a while ago. Well, it has been burning for 11 days. And after 11 days, Russians have finally been able to put it out. Half of that facility completely burned down, absolutely irreversibly, absolutely incredible. The damage that was dealt to the kerosene that all of you have been corrected that's used for aviation fuel has been definitely there. It's great, and the best part is Ukraine ain't stopping. There's another facility that's now burning for 3 days, and and it doesn't seem that it's gonna stop burning. So what does this tell us? Well, if the strikes are like we're seeing right now are happening against the storage facilities, that means that Ukraine is looking for impact right now on the front line. More specifically, to help ease up pressure that Russians are exerting, for example, on the Pakrovsk direction. Because with the storage facilities on fire, Russians are forced to bring new logistical chains into those movements, therefore making it harder for logistics in this short-term period. Whereas, for example, if we see the oil processing plants being struck, that is more of a long-term economic damage, just like strategical damage against Russia. So we're seeing that Ukraine is definitely taking the Russian advances on Pakrovsk seriously, and they are trying to undercut it. So let's cover the Pakrovsk, and news from there are still not good, but there are small glimmers of hope. First things first, and again, I'm only covering the things that are well known, well documented, and Russians know about this. So first things first, there have been reports that Ukrainians are indeed sending the brigades to reinforce the area. So there has been certain numbers floating around. There's like in thousands of men that supposedly are being sent right now to reinforce the area. My suspicion was that, this was something that I covered a lot, is that Ukraine needs two armies, right? There is an army that is defending against Russian defense army, and then there needs to be an attacking army. And that attacking army is what would help Ukraine essentially do these maneuvers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on. And every time there needs to be resources pulled from the attacking army that is being prepared in the back, that is obviously delaying things and making things harder for Ukraine, but they need to defend their territory always. So, the situation. Well, while Russians were able to move through Novokrodivka, there are reports that there are a couple of essentially buildings around the area of Novokrodivka that is still being defended, where around this line over here specifically, and Russians so far have not been moving as fast. But it seems that Russians were a little bit more preoccupied to securing their left flank, and they instead moved more forces towards the south. Both to do two things. There are 2 points of them that they're looking for. Firstly, they want to cut down this salient. They want to collapse this line over here to make sure that they don't have an exposed left flank. And secondly, if they want to advance towards Pakrovsk, which is located right over here, then they need to capture the strongholds of Hrodivka and Selidove, because if these two strongholds exist, then if Russia tries to advance towards Pokrovsk, Ukrainians still have the positions and the strongholds to potentially undercut their advances. Therefore, it's kind of critical for them to capture these two stronghold areas. Right now, they still cannot reach Pokrovsk. But as soon as this and this, or at least one of them, falls, at that moment we can fully confirm that the siege of Pakrovsk has started. And from there, then there's going to be the main line for Ukrainians to hold, like the critical line for Ukrainians to hold before situation gets really difficult, is this one right over here. So This is Pakrovsk, this is Mirnohrad, the neighbor city, and that's the line that Ukrainians would want to hold. And then there is this one or this one a little bit around Mirnohrad, but that's a little bit different. Let's talk about it when Ukrainians finally get there. Right now, Russians were able to move towards the south. They were able to cross the river of Vovcha, which is right over here. I'm going to try to zoom in. And I cannot control the size of the settlements. Unfortunately, the map auto-scales. And this is kind of defensive line that Ukrainians would want to hold. So far, the reports are that Ukrainians are holding it, but we'll see what's going to happen. And the same, by the way, is for Selidove. There are reports that Russians that try to kind of just enter Selidove and just kick the Ukrainians out, they got their face caved in and they are falling back and regrouping before they're going to try again. So far, it seems that there is not big stop of the momentum. We're going to see what the reserves that Ukrainians are sending will make. But essentially, what I was telling you about for a while is happening. Remember, some long time ago videos I told you, like if Ukrainians are losing Ocheretine or Avdiivka area, then they will be able to move south to collapse this area, to then move south to collapse this area, and so on and so on. So it's like a cascade reaction. So I was always expecting that this area is pretty much now in danger. Russians are actually advancing slower than I was expecting, but I think that's again, it's a very nuanced conversation where it's like, yeah, but Russia is still advancing. It's like, yes, barely, while losing a lot of men, but yeah, but they're still advancing. Yes, barely. Anyway, let's talk about the situation on the Kursk direction. So this is where Ukrainians are attacking. And despite the slowdown in their offense, there are still local fights for certain villages, but generally speaking, Ukraine has stabilized. Right now, Ukrainian command was in a scenario where they needed to figure out what would be the next step forward. And I believe that they had a couple of plans depending on how Russians would respond. I think the main kind of outcome that potentially Ukrainians were hoping for is that Russians will see this, that's like, oh my God, incursion into Russia proper. Therefore, we need to respond, and therefore we need to pull all of the troops to kick the Ukrainians out. Therefore, pulling in significant forces into the area and trying to kick Ukrainians out. I believe this was the initial plan. What Russians did instead is that they sent the secondary troops that are not sufficient to kick Ukrainians that entered the Russia proper territory, but it's enough to slow them down and almost stop them in advancing further, and instead continue pushing to try to capture Pakrovsk, because for Russians, capturing Ukrainian territory is more important for Putin to be a conqueror rather than defending their own territory. I believe that right now the key point around the Kursk area is this settlement of Korenovo. So here, Deep State has put the Korenovo in a gray area because the situation there was a little bit uncertain in the last couple of days, and Deep State does delay certain information. So Ukrainians were holding this village of Korenovo right over here on the east bank. I'm going to zoom in because it's not going to see. So you see this Korenovo. It's actually two villages. There's like this town of Korenovo on the left, and then there is this village of Korenovo on the right, and then there is river in the middle. So Ukrainians were holding the one that is on the right, but Russians were holding into the town of Korenovo to the west. And right now there have been certain videos of Russians actually sending reinforcements, and these reinforcements moved in and tried to attack into Korenovo. And there have been videos of Russians fighting inside of that village of Korenovo. However, later on, after that video appeared, it turned out that there were certain small groups of Russians attacking, but these small groups later on were destroyed, supposedly. Again, no confirmation visually, but they were supposedly destroyed, and Ukrainians are actually having much better position in Korenyevo right now. So, for example, Bogdan Miroshnikov here states that in Korenyevo district, the situation for the enemy is critical. The occupiers have already tried to counterattack several times, but they could not stop our movement and so on. And that's why I'm thinking that the most critical situation that's going to be here for Ukrainians is whether or not they will be able to capture this settlement of Korenyevo. If yes, then most likely they will continue expanding. I will expect potentially some additional resources be sent to move maybe towards Rylsk and move the fighting towards Rylsk and trying to cut off this highway, the E38 highway that goes right over here. So then in this area, I already talked a lot about this area where the Russian forces are cut off from the river. Right now, there has been pretty crazy amount of videos of a number of Russian pontoon bridges being burned out. Again, everything is in our Discord. There's dedicated channels for sharing those kind of videos because I cannot show it for you on YouTube because of the YouTube policies. So overall, Ukrainians are right now thinking where they should apply pressure, and Russians are considering prioritizing the attack on the Pakrovsk rather than defend of Kursk. Then some really bad news is that the first loss of F16 has been there, and I want to really underscore, for me this underscores the most the difference between how the Western media is covering Ukraine versus how Ukrainian media is covering Ukraine, because absolute dominant majority of Ukrainian media covered that they lost a pilot of the F16. Because for Ukraine, F16 is just a tool, and it is a tool. That's why, for example, for me, okay, the loss of F16, this is bad, yes, but it's still just a tool. The loss of the pilot, that is something that is priceless, and all my thoughts condolences go out to the family and friends of the pilot. I'm very sorry to hear that this happened. Supposedly this happened either because of mistake or because of the lack of coordination. Zelensky already sacked the commander of the aviation forces of Ukraine. The new one, the temporary one, has been established now. There has been mixed opinion about this, but the fact still stands that because of certain mistakes during the defense against the big missile barrages that Russia was sending over Ukraine the last couple of days, during one of those defenses, Ukrainians supposedly shut down the F-16, or it was a mistake of the pilot. It's unclear. Suja, inside of Kursk region, the main town that Ukrainians have captured, is being reported to be completely annihilated. So the answer of Russians towards anything that Ukrainians do is just destroy it. That's the only way that Russia can fight, and that's why I am underscoring it every time. If Ukraine has the resources, then Russia will not be able to do. Russia cannot fight how they needs to be fighting like Ukraine, with attacking and so on. They are fighting only by destroying everything. So if Ukraine has the tools to prevent Russians from, for example, using aviation bombs, then Russia will lose their initiative. For a longer time, Russia was able to do this because of artillery. Finally, the artillery, firstly, the attrition of artillery that Ukraine inflicted on Russia was extensive. And secondly, that the supply of shells finally from the Allies is already on point. So my hopes is, as the number of F-16s and other anti-air systems will come into Ukraine at larger quantities, we will see less and less of Russians trying to advance. And that's why I'm underscoring. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. What is? I just wanted to put this one here. So this is actually a BMP. So Russians use the camouflage net, and I just thought it looked hilarious, so I just put it here. And Russians are, again, another underscore, right? We think that, oh my God, Ukraine is doing not that well, like Ukraine is struggling at Pakrovsk, therefore Russia doing good. That is not true. Russia is struggling. Like the reserves that Russia has, they're not there. Like whatever Russia has, it is throwing right as it comes. For example, Russia is even pulling their troops from Burkina Faso. Anything just to get more manpower on the front line. That's why I'm underscoring that Putin is literally all in. That's why the Kursk offensive was so successful. That's why if Ukrainians are having certain forces in reserve, it can potentially really kneecap the Russian advances anywhere on the front line. I don't know the plan of Ukrainians, but I do know that the resources that Ukrainians are having are still insufficient. It definitely needs more. And then the painful topic that I was delaying for maybe 2-3 videos, and I don't care if this video is going to become really, really long because I needed to talk about this. So here the channel Bit.ly or to be or has been quoting the Financial Times, where their journalists have been spreading the ideas, and that's not only Financial Times. There's plenty of these journalists that have been stating this, like, oh my God, Kursk offensive, such a failure. Ukraine had to pull troops and send them to Russia proper instead of sending them to Ukrainian Pakrovsk direction. Therefore, Russians are advancing to Pakrovsk. We understand war better than Ukraine. Therefore, we are right. So, and here the To Be Or channel is basically venting the same frustration, and he did a great job because he put links to all of these, like an officer from the Azov, Roman Ponomarenko, Bogdan Krotevich, a chief staff of the Azov, a Konstantin Mashovets, a very highly knowledgeable expert against about the war in Ukraine, Andrew Perpetua, great OSINT analyst, and other people that are very good and understand the situation in Ukraine really, really well. And the main point that he underscores is that all of these are stating one very specific things. The problems that Ukraine has in Pakrovsk are not linked to the Kursk offensive. What Ukraine did in Kursk is great. It's a victory. And I want this to be written in stone. The offensive in Kursk is already a victory. The results that it brought for Ukraine with what they achieved is already massive. They are controlling part of the Russian territory. So if there is, for example, suddenly MAGA victory in US, which would be absolutely devastating for Ukraine, when there would be forced negotiations because there will be a push to sell out Ukraine, at that moment, Ukraine says like, well, we have a piece of Russia. So if we end where the lines are, well, we control part of Russia. It gives them additional leverage. It raised motivation for a lot of forces. It forced Russia to now rethink how are they defending their front lines, that Ukrainians can potentially enter some other areas. And while right now Russians are having some momentum and they're pushing on Pakrovsk, so like kind of all eyes on Pakrovsk, later on, this will be an actual problem. And many things more, like erasing all of the red lines that I don't know why still some of the Western allies are still having some kind of red lines about Russia. It is a victory. That's it. Like, it is a victory. That's why it's frustrating when I read some of these journalists that are still like looking at this like, oh, but what was the goal of Pakrovsk? Not Pakrovsk, but Kursk. Like, has Ukraine like won something and so on? It feels for me that for them, it's like if Ukrainian move didn't instantly collapse Russia and won the war, then there is like no victory or benefit to be had. And it is frustrating to no end. Absolutely stupidity. And I'm really happy that a channel like this, like To Be Or, that basically summarized and stating, no, it's like, no, Ukraine has issues. The problems that are happening right now in Pakrovsk have been there before. What is happening right now in Kursk is just a major victory for Ukraine. Just take the W. There are issues with Ukrainian armed forces. The problem that, the thing that we need to understand, the fact that there are problems in the Ukrainian armed forces is not meaning that the Russians are having it good. A lot of these problems at a larger even scale are present in the Russian military. And it's even worse. The only difference is that Russia has a lot of docile population that is prohibited from critiquing, and any kind of opposition is just getting squashed. Whereas here in Ukrainian side, we have democracy, freedom, ability to express frustration. And for us, the thinkers, the viewers, observers of this, we think is like, well, Russia is not complaining. Therefore, the side that is complaining is actually having it worse. And that is the counterintuitive understanding of what is happening there. So please, if you're here, continue spreading good information. And whenever you see someone trying to quote, saying like, oh, what could be the reason for Kursk? Just take the victory and shut the fuck up. That's what you should tell to the people that are trying to complaining about this. Even Petr Pavel, the president of Czechia, has weighted in. It's like, even to this level, the argument made that for some reason, this needs to be explained. And this only tells me that there are dumbasses in top politician levels that are coming to some kind of a meetings in European Parliament, in meetings around the European Council, in the NATO meetings, and they're like, fuck, what did Ukraine do? Is Ukraine even winning? And it's like, yeah, they are. Just give more weapons, more shit, need more shit, send more stuff. And that's the frustrating, because Ukraine has erased all of these lines, the red lines against Russia. And instead of sending more things, we are now not seeing it. Like, have you seen any massive new packages being sent to Ukraine recently? Have you? I haven't. To finalize this, I want to give a huge shout out to this one. So a friend of the channel, Jonathan from the Silicon Curtain, he made this nice movie about the Ukrainian athletes at Paris Olympics. I'm going to leave a link in the description, and I encourage you all to watch. Please watch, share it. It's a really great film to kind of take you off around this war stuff and think about the struggle that Ukrainians are having, even in the Olympic and sportist perspective. I'm gonna note that today is the last day of August, so we are kind of not really closing, but I'm gonna close the campaign today. Well, it's not gonna be closed, but like, I'm not gonna remind you about this anymore. So if you want to get a patch, if you still want to donate, the guys from Ukraine AidOps are gonna be really helpful, and I'm gonna leave you today with a video from there. So trust in Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini. And I see you next time.
Ми бійці 3-ї ШБР 2-го механізованого батальйону. Дякуємо фонду Ukraine AidOps за ці 10 Mavic 3.
From our side, we would like to thank the YouTube channel Sport of Defense, Ukraine Matters, and Combat Veteran Reacts for their continued support of our fundraisers. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!